The Shadow of the Canyon. The discovery. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had spent 15 years studying the geological formations of the Grand Canyon, but she had never encountered anything quite like the photograph that lay spread across her desk at the Northern Arizona University Research Facility. The black and white image, dated 1995, had been donated to the university's archives by the estate of Margaret Thompson, a local photographer who had documented the canyon's early tourism era. The photograph showed twin sisters, approximately 12 years old, standing on what appeared to be the south rim near Hopi Point. They wore matching white dresses and held hands, their faces bright with the innocent joy of childhood adventure. Behind them stretched the magnificent expanse of the Grand Canyon, its layered rock formations creating a dramatic backdrop that had captivated visitors for generations. But it wasn't the geological features that had caught Dr. Mitchell's attention. It was the shadow. Professor Chen, could you take a look at this? Sarah called to her colleague, Dr. James Chen, a specialist in historical photography and digital image analysis. James approached the desk, adjusting his glasses as he examined the photograph. What am I looking for? There, Sarah pointed to an area just to the left of the twin sisters. Do you see that shadow? James leaned closer, then reached for a magnifying glass from Sarah's desk drawer. After several moments of careful examination, he looked up with a puzzled expression. That's unusual, he said slowly. The shadow appears to be cast by a human figure, but there's no corresponding person visible in the photograph. The shadow was indeed distinct, clearly the silhouette of an adult figure standing upright, with what appeared to be long hair or a hat creating an elongated profile. The shadow fell across the rocky ground, in perfect alignment with the sun's position, suggesting it was cast by someone standing just outside the frame of the photograph. Could it be a photographic error? Sarah asked. Double exposure, perhaps? James shook his head. The quality and consistency of the shadow suggested was present when the photograph was taken. See how it interacts naturally with the terrain. A double exposure would create a different effect entirely. Sarah had discovered the photograph while researching historical documentation of geological changes in the canyon over time. The university had recently acquired a collection of over 500 photographs from the Thompson estate, spanning from most were standard tourist and landscape shots. But this particular image had stood out immediately. Have you found any information about who these girls were? James asked. That's what makes this even more interesting, Sarah replied, pulling out a manila folder. According to the documentation that came with the collection, these are the Hartwell twins, Emma and Grace. They were visiting the Grand Canyon with their family in the summer. Sarah opened the folder to reveal several documents. Hotel registrations, postcards, and a newspaper clipping from the Flagstaff Sun, dated August 15. The headline read, Local Family Enjoys Grand Canyon Holiday. The article mentions the Hartwell family from Phoenix. Sarah continued. Parents Robert and Helen and their twin daughters Emma and Grace, ages 12. They stayed at the El Tovar Hotel for a week. James studied the newspaper clipping, which included a smaller version of the same photograph they were examining. Did the newspaper mention anything unusual about their visit? Nothing in this article, but I haven't finished going through all the documentation yet. There are several more boxes of materials from the Thompson collection that haven't been catalogued. The two researchers spent the next hour examining the photograph from every angle, using various magnification tools and lighting techniques. The shadow remained consistently puzzling, too well-defined to be a photographic accident, too precisely positioned to be a random occurrence. Sarah, James said suddenly, look at the girls' expressions. Sarah focused on the faces of Emma and Grace Hartwell. While both girls were smiling, there was something in their eyes, a slight tension perhaps, or uncertain. It was subtle, but once James pointed it out, it became more noticeable. They look like they're aware of something, Sarah observed. Not frightened, exactly, but alert, exactly. And look at their body language. They're holding hands tightly, and their posture suggests they're leaning slightly away from the direction of the shadow. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm Arizona afternoon. As a scientist, she was trained to look for logical explanations, but the more they examined the photograph, the more questions arose. I think we need to do some deeper research on this, she said finally, starting with finding out more about the Hartwell family and their visit to the canyon. James nodded in agreement. I'll start working on digital enhancement of the image. Maybe we can pull out more details that aren't visible to the naked eye. That evening, Sarah took the photograph home with her to the small house she rented near the university. She lived alone, except for her cat, Sedona, and usually enjoyed the quiet solitude after long days of research. But tonight, something about the photograph made her feel uneasy. She placed the image on her kitchen table and made herself a cup of tea, studying the mysterious shadow while she ate a simple dinner. The more she looked at it, the more convinced she became that this wasn't a photographic anomaly. The shadow had been cast by someone who was present when the photograph was taken, someone who, for whatever reason, wasn't visible in the image itself. Are you intrigued by this mysterious discovery? Continued reading to uncover the secrets hidden within this 85-year-old photograph. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the university early, determined to uncover more information about the Hartwell family and their 19... She began by contacting the Grand Canyon National Park archives, hoping to find visitor records or incidental reports from that time period. Park historian David Yazzie was immediately interested when Sarah described the photograph and her research. 1935 was a significant year for the canyon, David explained during their phone conversation. It was during the height of the Depression, but tourism was actually increasing thanks to improved roads and facilities. However, it was also a year when we had several unusual incidents. What kind of incidents? Missing persons, mostly 3 separate cases of visitors who simply vanished without a trace. The Park Service kept detailed records because of the investigations that followed. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Do you have access to those records? I do. And I can tell you that one of those cases involved a family from Phoenix. Let me pull the file and call you back. While waiting for the Beath's call, Sarah decided to visit the university's genealogy department to research the Hartwell family. Rebecca Martinez, the genealogy specialist, was known for her ability to trace family histories through various databases and historical records. The Hartwell family from Phoenix in 1935. Dr. Martinez mused, typing into her computer. Let me see what I can find. After 20 minutes of searching through census records, city directories, and newspaper archives, Dr. Martinez had compiled a basic family profile. Here we go, she said, printing out several documents. Robert Hartwell, born 1895, worked as a bank manager in Phoenix. Ellen Hartwell, née Morrison, born 1898, Omicar. Twin daughters, Emma and Grace, born April 3rd, though they would have been 12 in 1935. Just as the newspaper article stated, Sarah confirmed. Yes, but here's where it gets interesting. Martinez continued, pulling up another document. He found a death certificate for Helen Hartwell, dated August 1935, just 5 days after that newspaper article about their Grand Canyon vacation. Sarah stared at the death certificate. What was the cause of death? Accidental fall. Location listed as Grand Canyon National Park. Before Sarah could fully process this information, her phone rang. It was David Yazzie calling back from the park archives. Sarah, I found the file you're interested in, David said, his voice serious. The Hartwell case was one of our most puzzling incidents. Helen Hartwell disappeared on August 13, 1935, during what should have been a routine family hike along the Rim Trail. The death certificate I just found says she died on August 20th from an accidental fall. That's correct. But there's more to the story. Her body wasn't found until 2 days after she was reported missing, and the circumstances of her disappearance were unusual. David explained that according to the Park Service report, the Hardwell family had been hiking together along the South Rim when Helen suddenly stopped and told her husband she needed to rest. She sat down on a bench near Hopi Point, the same area where the photograph had been taken 3 days earlier. Robert Hardwell told investigators that his wife seemed distracted, almost in a trance-like state. David continued, "She kept looking toward the canyon and saying she could hear someone calling her name." The twins were frightened and wanted to return to the hotel, but Helen insisted they continue hiking. What happened next? About an hour later, Helen excused herself to use the restroom facilities at the next viewpoint. When she didn't return after 20 minutes, Robert went to check on her. She was nowhere to be found. The restroom was empty, and no one had seen her leave. Sarah felt a chill. Where was her body? Eventually found. At the bottom of the canyon, near the Colorado River. The location was almost directly below where the family had been hiking, but investigators couldn't determine how she had gotten there. There were no witnesses, no signs of struggle, and no clear path she could have taken to reach that point. Was it ruled a suicide? Officially, it was classified as an accidental death, but the investigating ranger noted several inconsistencies in his report. Helen Hardwell had no history of mental illness, was reportedly happy and excited about the family vacation, and had shown no signs of distress until that final day. Sarah thanked David and promised to share any relevant findings from her research. After hanging up, she sat in Martinez's office, trying to process the connection between the mysterious shadow in the photograph and Helen Hardwell's death just 3 days later. "Dr. Martinez, could you help me find out what happened to the rest of the Hardwell family after Helen's death?" "Of course. Let me search for more recent records." The search revealed that Robert Hardwell had moved the family back to Phoenix immediately after the incident. He never remarried and died in 1910. The twins, Emma and Grace, had both married and had families of their own. "Here's something interesting," Martinez said, pointing to her screen. "Grace Hardwell, now Grace Patterson, is still alive. She's 89 years old and living in a retirement community in Scottsdale." Sarah's heart raced. One of the girls from the photograph was still alive and potentially able to provide first-hand information about what had happened during that fateful visit to the Grand Canyon. "Do you have contact information? I can get it through the retirement community's directory. Would you like me to make the initial contact?" "Please, but be gentle about it. This might be a very painful topic for her to discuss." That afternoon, Dr. Martinez called the Sunset Manor retirement community in Scottsdale and spoke with Grace Patterson. After explaining that they were university researchers studying historical photographs of the Grand Canyon, Grace agreed to meet with them the following day. "She seemed very interested when I mentioned that 1935 photograph," Dr. Martinez reported. "She said she'd been waiting for someone to ask her about that trip for over 80 years. Sarah spent the evening preparing for the interview, gathering copies of the photograph, the newspaper article, and the Park Service reports. She also asked James to prepare enhanced digital versions of the image that might reveal additional details. As she reviewed the materials one more time before bed, Sarah noticed something she had missed before. In the newspaper photograph, the smaller, lower-quality version of the image, the mysterious shadow was much less distinct. It was barely visible, almost as if it had been deliberately obscured or edited out. This raised a new question. Had Margaret Thompson, the photographer, been aware of the shadow when she developed the original image? And if so, why had she allowed the newspaper to publish a version that minimized its visibility? Sarah made a note to research Margaret Thompson's background and photographic practices. If the shadow was as significant as it seemed to be, the photographer might have left additional clues in her other work or personal record. Chapter 3. The Survivor's Tale. The drive to Scottsdale took Sarah and Dr. Martinez through some of Arizona's most beautiful desert landscape, but Sarah's mind was focused entirely on the upcoming interview with Grace Patterson. She had prepared a list of questions, but she knew that the most important information might come from allowing Grace to tell her story in her own way. Sunset Manor was a well-maintained retirement community with adobe-style buildings surrounded by carefully tended desert gardens. Grace Patterson met them in the community's library, a bright, comfortable room with large windows overlooking the mountains. At 89, Grace was remarkably sharp and alert. Her white hair was neatly styled, and her blue eyes, the same eyes that had looked out from the 1925 photograph, were clear and intelligent. She walked with a cane, but moved with purpose and dignity. "He brought some things I thought you might find interesting," Grace said, after introductions were made. She had prepared a small collection of items on the library table, a photo album, some letters, and what appeared to be a diary. Sarah showed Grace the enhanced version of the Grace studied it carefully, using a magnifying glass she had brought with her. "I haven't seen this image in its full clarity for many years," Grace said softly. "The newspaper version was so poor that you could barely make out the shadow. But I remember it being much more distinct in the original photograph." "You remember the shadow?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Oh yes, Emma and I both saw it when Mrs. Thompson showed us the photograph the day after she took it. We were staying at the El Tovar Hotel, and she had a small dark room set up in one of the storage rooms. She developed a film right there and brought the prints to show our family." Grace opened her photo album to a page containing several other photographs from the... "These are the other pictures Mrs. Thompson took of our family during that week. Look carefully at them." Sarah and Dr. Martinez examined the photographs. In 3 of the 5 images, they could detect faint shadows or shapes that didn't correspond to visible figures in the photographs. "Mrs. Thompson was very upset about these shadows," Grace continued. "She said in all her years of photography, she had never encountered anything like it. She thought her equipment might be malfunctioning, but she tested it thoroughly and couldn't find any problems." "What did your parents think about the shadows?" Grace's expression grew somber. "Father dismissed them as photographic anomalies, but Mother was very disturbed by them. She said they reminded her of something, but she wouldn't tell us what." Grace opened the diary she had brought. This was Mother's journal from that trip. She wrote in it every day until the day she disappeared. Sarah accepted the diary with reverence, understanding that Grace was sharing something deeply personal and painful. "May I read some of the entries?" "Please do. I think they might help explain what happened." Sarah opened the diary to the first entry, dated August 10, "Arrived at the Grand Canyon today. The girls are so excited, and Robert is already planning all the hiking we'll do. The hotel is lovely, and our room has a beautiful view of the canyon. I feel so peaceful here, as if I've come home to a place I've never been before." The entries for the next few days described typical tourist activities, visiting viewpoints, taking photographs, shopping for souvenirs. But beginning with the entry for August 14, the tone began to change. "Had the strangest experience today. While the girls were napping, I was sitting on our balcony, looking out at the canyon, when I could have sworn I heard someone calling my name. The voice seemed to come from the canyon itself, echoing up from the depths. When I mentioned it to Robert, he said it was probably just the wind, but I know what I heard." August 5, the day the photograph was taken, Mrs. Thompson took photographs of the family today. When she showed them to us this evening, there were shadows in several of the images that shouldn't be there. The girls were frightened, and honestly so was I. The shadows looked like people, but there was no one else around when the pictures were taken. Mrs. Thompson is as puzzled as we are. August 16. The voice is getting stronger. I hear it mostly in the early morning and late evening when the canyon is quiet. It's definitely a woman's voice, and she seems to be trying to tell me something important. I haven't told Robert because he'll think I'm having some kind of nervous breakdown. But I'm not imagining this. August 17, I saw her today, not clearly, just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye while we were hiking along the rim. A woman in old-fashioned clothing, standing near the edge of the canyon. When I turned to look directly at her, she was gone. But I know she was there. The girls saw her too. I could tell by their expressions, though they didn't say anything. The final entry was dated August 18th, the day Helen Hartwell disappeared. She spoke to me clearly this morning. Her name is Catherine, and she's been waiting at the canyon for a very long time. She says she needs my help to find her way home. I don't understand what she means, but I feel compelled to help her. There's something about her voice that calls to me, as if we're connected somehow. I'm going to try to find her today and see what she needs. The diary entry ended there. Sarah looked up to find Grace watching her with tears in her eyes. Mother never came back from that hike, Grace said quietly. And we never saw Catherine, or whoever she was, again. But Emma and I always believed that Mother didn't fall accidentally. We think she went to help Catherine. And somehow, they both found what they were looking for. Did you ever research who Catherine might have been? We tried. Years later, when we were adults, we found records of several women who had died at the Grand Canyon over the years. But none named Catherine. At least, none in the official records. Grace reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn photograph. But we did find it. The photograph was much older than the 1935 image, probably from the Luchos Momentes or early 1900s. It showed a young woman in Victorian-era clothing, standing near what appeared to be the Grand Canyon rim. The woman had long, dark hair and a serious expression. We found this in an antique shop in Flagstaff in 1962, Grace explained. The shop owner said it had come from an estate sale of someone who had worked at the Grand Canyon in the early days. When we saw it, we both immediately recognized her as the woman we had glimpsed. Saria studied the old photograph carefully. The woman did have an otherworldly quality about her, and there was something in her expression that suggested sadness or longing. Did the shop owner know anything about who was? Only that her name was Catherine Morrison, and that she had disappeared at the Grand Canyon sometime in the early 1900s. Her body was never found. Dr. Martinez looked up sharply. Morrison? That was your mother's maiden name. Grace nodded slowly. We discovered that too, eventually. Catherine Morrison was Mother's great-aunt. She had come to the Grand Canyon in 1903 as part of a geological expedition, and simply vanished one day. The family always assumed she had fallen into the canyon, but her body was never recovered. Want to discover the shocking connection between past and present? Keep reading to uncover the truth behind these mysterious disappearances. Armed with new information about Catherine Morrison and her connection to the Hartwell family, Sarah decided to delve deeper into Margaret Thompson's photographic record. The university archives contained not only Thompson's photographs, but also her personal notes and correspondence related to her work at the Grand Canyon. Sarah spent the morning in the archives basement, carefully examining boxes of Thompson's materials that had been donated along with the photographs. Most of the contents were routine equipment lists, client correspondence, and business records. But in the third box, she found something extraordinary. A leather-bound journal that Thompson had kept specifically for documenting unusual photographic phenomena. The journal's first entry was dated 1932. Began noticing strange anomalies in photographs taken at certain locations around the canyon. Shadows and shapes that don't correspond to visible subjects. Initially assumed equipment malfunction, but extensive testing reveals cameras and film are functioning normally. Phenomenon appears to be location-specific. Sarah flipped through the journal, finding dozens of entries documenting similar occurrences over a 3-year period. Thompson had been methodically cataloging instances where her photographs captured images that shouldn't have been there. A 1934 entry caught Sarah's attention, met with Navajo elder Thomas Begay today. Showed him several of the anomalous photographs. He was not surprised by what I showed him. Says the canyon has always been a place where the spirits of the lost gather, waiting for resolution. It warned me to be careful about photographing in certain areas, particularly near Hopi Point and the Hermit Trail. Sarah made a note to research Thomas Begay and see if any of his descendants might still be in the area. Indigenous perspectives on the canyon's spiritual significance could provide crucial context for understanding these phenomena. The journal entry for August 5, 1935, the day Thompson photographed the Harwell twins, was particularly detailed. Photographed the Harwell family today at Hopi Point. The moment I looked through the viewfinder, I could see there was something unusual about the scene. There appeared to be additional figures present that were not visible to the naked eye. The twin girls seemed aware of this presence. They kept looking toward an area where nothing was visible, but my camera was clearly detecting something. When I developed the photographs this evening, the anomalies were even more pronounced than usual. Distinct shadows cast by invisible figures, and in one image, what appears to be the partial outline of a woman in period clothing. Mrs. Harwell became very agitated when she saw the photographs. She asked me repeatedly if I had seen anyone else in the area when I took the pictures. I'm beginning to suspect that certain individuals may be more sensitive to these presences than others. Mrs. Hartwell clearly sensed something that the rest of her family did not. I fear this sensitivity may not be entirely benign. The final entry related to the Hartwell family was dated August 2013. Terrible news about Mrs. Hartwell. Her body was found at the bottom of the canyon this morning. Mr. Hartwell is devastated and the twins are in shock. He can't help but feel that the anomalies in the photographs were somehow connected to this tragedy. I've decided to stop photographing at Hopi Point and the surrounding areas. Some things are better left undisturbed. Sarah photographed the relevant journal pages and then continued searching through Thompson's materials. In the final box she found a manila envelope marked Catherine Morrison. Inside the envelope were several items, a copy of a newspaper article about Catherine's disappearance, a hand-drawn map of the area where she was last seen, and most surprisingly, a photograph that appeared to be from the early. The photograph showed a young woman standing near the canyon rim, and Sarah immediately recognized her as the same person Grace Patterson had shown them in the antique shop photograph. But this version was clearer and more detailed, and there was something written on the back in faded ink. Catherine Morrison, July 9, last known photograph. Attached to the photograph was a note in Thompson's handwriting. Found this photograph in the effects of James Morrison, Catherine's brother after his death in 19. He had hired me to photograph his family's memorial service and mentioned his sister's disappearance at the Grand Canyon. When I showed him some of my anomalous photographs from Hopi Point, he became very excited and insisted on giving me this image of Catherine. He believed she was still at the canyon, waiting for someone from the family to help her find peace. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to come together. Catherine Morrison had disappeared in Nintuttarin. Her great-niece Inez to the Natilonatre. Her great-niece Helen Hartwell, had died at the canyon in 1935 after experiencing visions and hearing voices. And Margaret Thompson had documented supernatural phenomena in the same area for years. That afternoon, Sarah called Dr. Chen to share her discoveries. He had been working on digital enhancement of the original 1935 photograph and had made some remarkable progress. Sarah, you need to see what I found, James said, excitedly. I've been able to enhance the shadow in the photograph to an extraordinary degree. It's not just a shadow, there are actual details visible. Sarah hurried to James's laboratory, where he had the enhanced image displayed on a large computer monitor. The improvement in clarity was stunning. So the shadow now clearly showed the outline of a woman in early 1900s. Clothing with long hair and a distinctive hat style that was popular around that. But that's not all. James continued. Look at this. I zoomed in on a section of the photograph near the canyon rim, behind and to the right of the twins. With the digital enhancement, a faint but unmistakable figure was visible, translucent, but clearly the form of a woman in period clothing. She's actually in the photographs, Sarah whispered. Not just the shadow, but the figure itself. The shadow is being cast by this translucent figure, James confirmed. It's as if she was physically present, but not entirely solid. The camera was able to capture both her form and the shadow she cast, even though she wasn't visible to the people present. Sarah studied the enhanced image carefully. The figure's posture suggested she was reaching toward the twins, as if trying to communicate with them or get their attention. James, can you enhance any other areas of the photograph? I want to see if there are additional details we've missed. Over the next hour, James worked through different sections of the image. In the background, near the canyon rim, they discovered what appeared to be additional faint figures, at least 3 other translucent forms that were barely detectable even with enhancement. It's like the area was populated with spirits that only the camera could see, James observed. And based on the clothing styles visibly in the enhanced images, these figures appeared to be from different time periods, some from the early 90s. Sarah thought about Thompson's journal entries and the pattern of disappearances at the Grand Canyon over the years. What if this area of the canyon is some kind of gathering place for people who died there under mysterious circumstances? You mean like they're trapped somehow? Or waiting? Grace Patterson said her mother felt compelled to help Catherine Morrison. What if Catherine and the others have been waiting for family members or others who could help them find resolution? That evening, Sarah decided to research the broader history of disappearances and unexplained deaths at the Grand Canyon. She contacted David Jazzy at the Park Service and asked if he could provide information about missing persons cases dating back to the early 90s. That's a substantial request, David David. But I can tell you that the Grand Canyon has always had more than its share of unexplained disappearances. Some areas seem to be particularly problematic, such as Hopi Point and the surrounding rim areas have the highest concentration of unexplained incidents. We've had dozens of cases over the years where people simply vanished without a trace. Bodies are rarely recovered, and when they are, the circumstances often don't match the evidence. Sarah asked David to compile a list of missing persons cases from the Hopi Point area, particularly focusing on women who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She had a growing suspicion that Catherine Morrison and Helen Hartwell were part of a larger pattern that had been occurring for decades. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah found herself thinking about the enhanced photograph and the translucent figures James had revealed. Tomorrow, she planned to visit the Grand Canyon herself, specifically the area around Hopi Point, where the 1935 photograph had been taken. She wanted to see the location firsthand and try to understand what might be drawing these lost souls to that particular spot. Sarah arrived at the Grand Canyon South Rim early in the morning, hoping to visit Hopi Point before the area became crowded with tourists. She had brought copies of both the original 1935 photograph and James's enhanced digital version, along with Margaret Thompson's journal and the historical materials about Catherine Morrison. The drive from Flagstaff had given her time to think about what she hoped to accomplish. As a scientist, she was trained to look for empirical evidence and logical explanations. But the accumulated evidence from her research suggested that something beyond conventional understanding was occurring at this location. Hopi Point was one of the most popular viewpoints along the South Rim, offering spectacular views of the Colorado River and the canyon's layered rock formations. At 7 a.m., however, Sarah found herself virtually alone at the overlook. She positioned herself approximately where Margaret Thompson would have stood to take the 1935 photograph, using the background rock formations as reference points. The twins had been standing near the stone wall that bordered the viewpoint, with the vast canyon stretching out behind them. Sarah took several photographs of the area with her digital camera, then sat on one of the benches to study Thompson's journal entries about the location. According to the journal, Thompson had first noticed photographic anomalies at Hopi Point in 1932, and they had become increasingly frequent over the following years. As Sarah read, she became aware of an unusual sensation, a feeling that she was being watched. She looked around the viewpoint, but she was still alone. The feeling persisted, however, and seemed to be coming from the direction of the canyon itself. She walked to the stone wall and looked out over the vast expanse. The morning light was creating dramatic shadows on the canyon walls, and the Colorado River was visible as a thin ribbon far below. It was undeniably beautiful, but there was something else, an almost tangible sense of sadness or longing that seemed to emanate from the depths. Sarah took out her camera and began photographing the area systematically, including the spots where the twins had stood in minted. As she worked, the feeling of being observed grew strong. She found herself looking over her shoulder repeatedly, expecting to see someone approaching. But the viewpoint remained empty. Around 8:30 a.m., an elderly Navajo man arrived at the overlook. He walked slowly, using a carved wooden cane, and nodded politely to Sarah as he approached the viewing area. "Beautiful morning," he said, his voice carrying the soft accent of someone who had grown up speaking Navajo as a first language. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied. "Are you here to watch the sunrise?" The man smiled. "I come here most mornings. My grandfather used to bring me to this place when I was a boy. He taught me to listen to what the canyon has to say." Sarah felt a sudden intuition. "Your grandfather wouldn't have been Thomas Begay, would he?" The man looked surprised. "It was. How did you know that?" "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Northern Arizona University. I've been researching some historical photographs taken at this location, and I found references to your grandfather in a photographer's journal from the—" "Oh, you must mean Margaret Thompson." "Yes, my grandfather spoke with her several times. He was concerned about her work here." The man introduced himself as Robert Begay, Thomas's grandson. He was now 73 years old and worked as a cultural consultant for the National Park Service. "My grandfather told me stories about this place," Robert continued. "He said it was a gathering point for lost spirits, people who died in the canyon but couldn't find their way to the next world." Sarah showed Robert the enhanced photograph from 1975, pointing out the translucent figures that James had revealed through digital processing. Robert studied the image carefully, then nodded slowly. "This doesn't surprise me. My grandfather could see them too, sometimes." I said they were waiting for something, usually for family members to help them complete their journey. "Did he ever mention a woman named Catherine Morrison?" "Not by name, but he spoke of a woman from the early days who had been waiting the longest. She had come to the canyon as part of a scientific expedition and had become separated from her group. He said she was the one who called to others, trying to get help finding her way home." Robert explained that, according to Navajo tradition, people who died away from their homeland sometimes became lost between worlds, unable to complete their spiritual journey without assistance from the living. "The canyon is a powerful place," Robert said. "It can hold onto spirits, especially those who died with unfinished business or strong emotional connections to family." Sarah asked Robert if he would be willing to walk through the area with her and share any insights he might have about the spiritual significance of the location. He agreed that, and they spent the next hour exploring the viewpoint and the immediate surrounding area. Near a cluster of pinyon pines, about 50 yards from the main overlook, Robert stopped suddenly. "Here," he said quietly, "this is where they gather." Sarah looked around but saw nothing unusual. However, she did notice that the temperature seemed noticeably cooler in this spot, despite the warming morning sun. "My grandfather taught me to feel for the presence of spirits," Robert explained. "They create cold spots, and sometimes you can sense their emotions, sadness, longing, confusion. As they stood in the grove of trees, Sarah began to feel the same sensation she had experienced earlier, the feeling of being watched, but now it was stronger and seemed to be coming from multiple directions. "How many do you sense?" she asked Robert. "4, maybe 5. They're curious about you. I think they know you're trying to help them." Robert suggested that Sarah try speaking aloud to the spirits, explaining her research and her desire to understand the situation. Feeling somewhat self-conscious but willing to try anything, Sarah addressed the empty air around them. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said clearly. "I'm researching what happened to Catherine Morrison and Helen Hardwell. If you're here, and if you can hear me, I want to help you find peace." The response was immediate and startling. The temperature dropped even further, and Sarah could have sworn she heard a faint whisper carried on the wind, not words she could understand, but definitely the sound of a human voice. Robert nodded approvingly. "They hear you, but they need more than words. They need someone who can help them connect with their families, or at least understand why they're still here." Sarah spent another hour at the location, taking photographs and making detailed notes about the experience. When she finally left Hopi Point, she felt she had gained a new understanding of the situation, but she also realized that her research was far from complete. Ready to uncover the final pieces of the supernatural puzzle, continue reading to discover how science and spirit converge in an unexpected resolution. Back at the university, Sarah compiled her findings from the visit to Hopi Point and began cross-referencing them with the historical records David Yazzie had provided about missing persons at the Grand Canyon. The list was longer than she had expected, over 30 cases of unexplained disappearances in the Hopi Point area, dating back to 1901. What struck Sarah most was the pattern that emerged when she organized the cases chronologically. The disappearances occurred in clusters with periods of several years between incidents, and they seemed to coincide with visits from family members of previous victims. Catherine Morrison had disappeared in 1903. Her great-niece Helen Hartwell had died in. Between those dates, there had been 3 other disappearances of women, all of whom had reported hearing voices or seeing figures before they vanished. Sarah created a timeline and began researching the family connections between the victims. What she discovered was remarkable. Each of the women who had disappeared after Catherine Morrison was related to her, either directly or through marriage. It was as if Catherine was calling to her family members across the decades, drawing them to the canyon. Martinez helped Sarah trace the genealogical connections, and they discovered that 2 more Morrison descendants were still alive. Catherine's great-great-niece, Linda Morrison Chen, who lived in San Francisco, and her great-great-nephew, Michael Morrison, who lived in Denver. "Should we contact them?" Dr. Martinez asked. Sarah hesitated. Based on the pattern they had identified, Morrison family members seemed to be particularly susceptible to whatever force was operating at Hopi Point. Contacting them might put them in danger. "Let me think about this," Sarah said. "Maybe there's another way to approach the problem." That afternoon, Sarah called Robert Bagay and asked if he could recommend a traditional healer or spiritual advisor who might be able to help with the situation. Robert suggested his cousin, Maria Bagay, who was a respected medicine woman in the Navajo community. She has experience with helping lost spirits find their way. Robert explained, "If anyone can help these women find peace, it would be Maria." Sarah arranged to meet with Maria Bagay the following day. Maria was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a calm, authoritative presence. She listened carefully as Sarah explained her research and the evidence they had gathered about the spirits at Hopi Point. "This is not uncommon," Maria said when Sarah finished her account. "Sometimes when people die far from home, especially if they die with strong emotions or unfinished business, their spirits become confused. They don't know how to move on to the next world. Is there a way to help them?" "Yes, but it requires understanding what they need to complete their journey. Usually, it's some form of closure or connection with their families. Maria suggested that they organize a ceremony at Hopi Point, not to contact the spirits directly, but to offer them a pathway to resolution. She explained that in Navajo tradition, such ceremonies often involved creating a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead, allowing trapped spirits to complete their transition. We would need something that belonged to Catherine Morrison, if possible, Maria explained, and we would need representatives of her family to participate in the ceremony. Sarah remembered the items she had found in Margaret Thompson's archives. Among Catherine's effects that had been given to Thompson was a small silver locket that had belonged to Catherine. It might be exactly what they needed for the ceremony. The question remained whether to contact Catherine's living descendants. After discussing the situation with Maria, they decided that the ceremony might actually be safer for the family members than leaving the situation unresolved. If Catherine was indeed calling to her family across the decades, the pattern of disappearances would likely continue until the spiritual issue was addressed. Sarah called Linda Morrison Chen in San Francisco and carefully explained the situation. Linda was initially skeptical, but when Sarah described the family connections and the pattern of disappearances, Linda became very interested. "My grandmother always told stories about Catherine," Linda said. She said Catherine had been the adventurous one in the family, always exploring and pushing boundaries. When she disappeared at the Grand Canyon, it devastated the whole family. Linda agreed to participate in the ceremony and offered to contact Michael Morrison in Denver to see if he would join them. Within a week, both Morrison descendants had agreed to travel to Arizona for the ceremony. Meanwhile, James had continued his digital analysis of the 1935 photograph and had made an additional discovery. Using advanced imaging software, he had been able to detect faint text in the background of the image, words that appeared to be carved into the rock face of the canyon wall. "It's very faint," James explained, showing Sarah the enhanced image on his computer. "But it appears to say Catherine Morrison, Diento Dorintores, followed by what might be coordinates or a location marker." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Could Catherine have carved a name into the rock before she disappeared? It's possible. The carving appears to be in a location that would have been accessible from the Rim Trail, but it's in an area that's now off limits to tourists. Sarah contacted David Yazzie at the Park Service and asked if it would be possible to examine the rock face where the carving appeared to be located. David was intrigued by the discovery and agreed to arrange a special access permit for Sarah and a park ranger to investigate the site. The examination of the rock face confirmed in James's analysis, carved into the sandstone, barely visible after more than a century of weathering, were the words "C. Morrison July into Sandoceres," along with an arrow pointing toward a narrow ledge that extended out over the canyon. "This changes everything," Sarah told Maria Begay when she reported the discovery. "Catherine didn't just disappear, she left a message. She was trying to mark her location for someone to find." Maria nodded thoughtfully. She was trying to leave a trail home, but something prevented her from completing her journey, and she's been waiting ever since for someone to follow the trail she left. The ceremony was scheduled for the following weekend, during the new moon, when the spiritual veil was considered to be thinnest. Sarah, Maria, Robert Begay, Linda Morrison Chen, and Michael Morrison would gather at Hopi Point at dawn to perform the ritual that Maria hoped would finally allow Catherine and the other trapped spirits to find peace. As the date approached, Sarah found herself both excited and nervous about the outcome. Her scientific training made her skeptical about spiritual ceremonies, but the evidence she had gathered over the past months suggested that conventional explanations were inadequate for understanding what was happening at the Grand Canyon. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cold, with a thin layer of frost covering the ground at the south rim. Sarah arrived at Hopi Point before sunrise, carrying Catherine Morrison's silver locket and copies of all the historical documents they had gathered. Maria Begay was already there, preparing the ceremonial items she had brought: sage for smudging, cornmeal for offerings, and a small drum. Linda Morrison Chen and Michael Morrison arrived together, having driven up from Flagstaff, where they had spent the night. Both were clearly nervous, but determined to participate in the ceremony. Linda, a retired teacher in her 60s, bore a strong resemblance to the photographs of Catherine Morrison. Michael, a software engineer in his 40s, had brought a laptop containing the family genealogy research he had compiled over the years. Robert Begay joined them as the first light of dawn began to illuminate the canyon walls. He had brought his grandfather's ceremonial items, including a prayer bundle that Thomas Begay had specifically prepared for helping lost spirits find their way home. "Before we begin," Maria said, "I want everyone to understand what we're trying to accomplish. We're not attempting to contact the dead or bring them back. We're offering them a pathway to complete their spiritual journey. This is an act of healing, both for the spirit and for the family." Maria explained the ceremony step by step. They would create a sacred circle at a location where the Niente Destrantescinto photograph had been taken, make offerings to the four directions, and then invite the spirits to accept the help they needed to move on. The Morrison family members would speak directly to Catherine, acknowledging her sacrifice and offering their love and forgiveness for any unfinished business. As the sun rose over the canyon, casting long shadows across the viewpoint, the group formed a circle near the stone wall, where Emma and Grace Hartwell had posed for their photograph 85 years earlier. Maria began the ceremony by smudging each participant with sage smoke and offering prayers in Navajo. The temperature at the viewpoint began to drop noticeably as the ceremony progressed, and Sarah felt a familiar sensation of being watched. But this time, the feeling was not unsettling. It felt more like anticipation, as if the spirits were gathering to witness what was about to happen. Linda Morrison Chen was the first family member to speak to Catherine. "Catherine, I'm Linda, your great-great-niece. I want you to know that your family never forgot you. We've told your story to every generation, and we've always wondered what happened to you at this beautiful, sacred place. If you're here, if you can hear me, I want you to know that you're loved and that it's okay to let go now. Your family is safe, and your memory lives on in all of us." Michael Morrison followed, his voice shaking with emotion. "Catherine, I'm Michael, and I represent all the Morrison men who came after you. We're proud of your courage and your spirit of adventure. You were a pioneer, exploring places that few women of your time ever saw. But your journey here is complete now. You don't need to wait for us anymore. We're here to tell you that you can go home." As Michael finished speaking, the temperature dropped even further, and everyone in the circle could hear what sounded like a gentle wind moving through the trees, except there was no wind. The sound seemed to carry voices, faint but unmistakably human, speaking words they couldn't quite understand. Maria began drumming slowly and chanting in Navajo, her voice carrying across the canyon and echoing back from the distant walls. She invited the spirits to accept the offerings and to follow the path of light that would lead them to their final rest. Sarah, watching the ceremony unfold, noticed something extraordinary happening with the light. The morning sun, which had been casting normal shadows across the viewpoint, began to create patterns that seemed almost intentional, beams of light that formed pathways leading from the viewing area toward the eastern horizon. In one of these beams of light, Sarah could swear she saw movement, translucent figures walking slowly away from the viewpoint, following the path of sunlight toward the rising sun. She counted at least 5 figures, all women, all wearing clothing from different historical periods. The figure leading the group was clearly Catherine Morrison, recognizable from the historical photographs. She paused at the edge of the light beam and seemed to look back toward the Morrison family members. For just a moment, Sarah thought she saw Catherine raise a hand in a gesture of farewell and gratitude. Then the figures faded into the morning light and were gone, The ceremony concluded with Maria offering cornmeal to the four directions and speaking a final prayer for the peaceful journey of the departed spirits. As the group prepared to leave, the temperature at the viewpoint returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling of sadness that had characterized the location seemed to lift. "It's done," Maria said simply. "They've found their way home." Over the following weeks, Sarah monitored the situation at Hopi Point through her contacts at the Park Service. David Yaziari reported that the area felt different, lighter somehow, and that park rangers had noticed a decrease in the number of unexplained incidents and visitor complaints about feeling uncomfortable at the viewpoint. Sarah completed the research by documenting the entire experience in a comprehensive report that she submitted to both the university and the National Park Service. While she couldn't prove scientifically what had occurred during the ceremony, the historical evidence and the subsequent changes at the location suggested that a genuine resolution had been achieved. The 1935 photograph of the Hartwell twins, which had started the entire investigation, was donated to the Grand Canyon National Park Archives, along with all the supporting documentation. Sarah included a note explaining the research and the ceremony, hoping that future researchers would understand the significance of what they had discovered. Linda Morrison Chen and Michael Morrison both reported feeling a sense of closure about Catherine's disappearance. Linda established a small scholarship fund in Catherine's name for women pursuing careers in geology and exploration, honoring her ancestors' pioneering spirit. Margaret Thompson's photographic journals were also donated to the Parque Archives, providing valuable documentation of supernatural phenomena at the Grand Canyon during. Sarah hoped that Thompson's meticulous records would help future researchers understand the spiritual significance of certain locations within the park. 6 months after the ceremony, Sarah returned to Hopi Point for a final visit. The viewpoint was busy, with tourists enjoying the spectacular views, and the atmosphere was completely normal. No cold spots, no feelings of being watched, no sense of sadness or longing. She stood at the stone wall where the Hartwell twins had posed for their photograph and thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. As a scientist, she had been trained to seek empirical evidence and logical explanation, but her research into the mystery of the 1935 photograph had taught her that some phenomena exist at the intersection of science and spirit, requiring both analytical thinking and open-minded acceptance of possibilities beyond conventional understanding. Fascinated by this incredible journey from mystery to resolution, share this story and explore the hidden histories that may be waiting in your own family photographs. The shadow in the 1935 photograph had led to the discovery of a family tragedy that had echoed across generations, and ultimately to the healing of wounds that had persisted for more than a century. Sarah realized that her role as a researcher had evolved during the investigation. She had become not just a documenter of historical facts, but a facilitator of spiritual healing and family reconciliation. As she prepared to leave Hopi Point for the final time, Sarah took one last photograph of the viewpoint, where it all began. When she later developed an image, she was pleased to see that it showed only what was visible to the naked eye: tourists enjoying the view, the magnificent canyon stretching into the distance, and the clear, bright shadows cast by the Arizona sun. The mystery of the shadow had been solved, and the spirits had found their peace. But Sarah knew that the Grand Canyon, with its vast depths and ancient mysteries, would continue to hold secrets waiting to be discovered by future researchers brave enough to look beyond the surface and seek the truth hidden in the shadows of history.